So this is the second part in a 4-part presentation that I'll be doing with the subsequent third and fourth part to come in January and February, which will mean it will have covered the time 2 months before in the planning and 2 months in the actual living side of moving to Australia. So this is really a dream come true for me. And I felt prompted to run this series because oftentimes when I'm speaking to prospective clients, prospective Aussie clients in particular, they will often say, I would love to spend time in Australia and time in the US. That would really just be the way I'd love to do it. And so I figured being a financial advisor and someone that thinks about this in a lot of detail and has clients in Australia and the US, that perhaps folks out there would be interested in the way that we approached this topic. So just be careful here. This is very, very specific to my circumstances, my household circumstances, and I would encourage you to seek professional tax, financial planning, and legal advice as is appropriate. I only provide personal advice to my clients, and I'm thrilled to see a number of them on tonight's call. So who am I? A little bit about me. I'm a tri-citizen raised in Queensland, Australia, born in England to an American mother. So the concept of cross-border financial planning has been inherent with me as long as I've been around. Let me see, I've been in the business now for a decade, founded Arete Wealth Strategists in California back in 2013, moved to Minnesota in 2014. I've got a graduate diploma in financial planning in Australia, a CFP in the US. I taught at UC Berkeley Extension, and I am also the founder of the Global Financial Planning Institute, where I train, or me and my team train other financial planners in what cross-border financial planning actually is, with the goal of elevating the quality of professionalism in advice delivered to clients in that situation. So we work with clients with those kinds of issues. But let's get into it here tonight. So we're going to recap the division of responsibilities. So what I do versus what Eliza does. We lean into our strengths, give you an update on where we are with our housing decision and some logistics, and then get into the meat of tonight's presentation, which is to do with the financial considerations. Can we even afford this? How did we model it? What was different in a cross-border context? And tax planning, very, very complicated tax planning, figuring out what my residency will be at different times throughout the year. How will I be taxed well in Australia? Do I have to pay US state taxes? Tax year non-alignment. Remember, Australia's tax year begins July 1st, ends June 30th. The US follows the calendar year. So a little bit about me and the context with which I'm undertaking this move. I run a thriving and successful financial planning business for Americans in Australia and Australians in America, as well as domestic clients. I'm first and foremostly a US registered investment advisor. I am not registered in Australia and don't intend on becoming registered in Australia. I have staff across 2 time zones. We work in client on weeks and off weeks. Mostly the off weeks are really just doing the preparation for the on weeks. And I've seen very strong growth in the last couple of years. The Global Financial Planning Institute is a 4-person team across 4 time zones. We currently have 25 advisor participants and strong growth in that entity as well. So tonight we're going to be dealing here with the financial and tax implications with sessions 3 and 4, looking at what you see there, points 7 through 10. So let's get into it. All right, who is doing what? And tonight, as you've guessed, is just the Ashley show. Eliza was here last month, and if you missed last month, it's up on YouTube as where we put all of our presentations. So feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. But you'll see we've got a pretty strict division of responsibilities. Not necessarily because anyone mandated it that way. It was just makes a whole lot of sense. My wife, lovely lady, she has a background. She's a nurse practitioner. She has a background organizing medical missions. So she is really detailed with logistics and immigration matters. So things that are really to do with health and immigration, they tend to fall on her, whereas I'm more the finances, tax, and business preparation kind of guy. And you see a few of those items in the middle that we both participate in, including housing. And it's on that front that I wanted to provide a bit of an update. So I started subscribing to a local newspaper in Brisbane to get a feel for what's going on there. And they had a wonderful headline just last week. I say wonderful tongue in cheek. It's not good for me. It's good for many homeowners there, but they just announced all-time record highs in real estate prices. So that's interesting. And that's partly informed our decision to not buy. And it's largely because anything that we would want to buy, we can't afford. So that makes it very tough. The other thing that makes it tough, and I think what accounts for the interest in this presentation series, is my family and I are not the only ones doing what we're doing. There is a ton of interest. We're hearing from the rental agents in Brisbane of folks moving back from all over the world. These returning Aussie expats are going back there because they have decided that's a place they'd rather ride out COVID and be closer to their families and enjoy, maybe certainly where I live, maybe avoid another freezing cold winter. But out of the frying pan, or I should say out of the freezer and into the frying pan would be the appropriate saying here, going from the Minnesota winter back to the Brisbane summer. So there's a super hot rental market with the returning expats. We've been told by the rental agents that if you want to be seriously considered, you're talking about offering above market rates for rentals. And even then, the agents will present a number of qualified buyers, or correction, qualified renters to the property agents, and they'll decide from there. That aside, I wanted to say, that aside, the lack of affordability, frequent participants in my webinars would know I am no fan of owning real estate in Australia anyway, for all of the various tax disincentives that they provide, namely non-resident rates of tax, lack of capital gains exemptions, having to file taxes every 6 months because you'd have Australian taxes to file, then US taxes. The whole thing is pretty unappealing to begin with. And it doesn't help that despite the turmoil that COVID has caused to the world economy, it is really odd to me that they're hitting all-time highs in Australia. Nevertheless, that's what's happening. So we're choosing not to buy, placing rental offers overbid, as you heard me say, and really crossing our fingers and hoping for the best. Of course, subscribing. We've customized a filter in realestate.com.au for our criteria. I'm not going to tell you what my criteria is because I'm not wanting to spike that competitiveness in the particular suburbs that we're looking at, but that's definitely a tip. And then going the extra mile, contacting the agents that seem to be active in that area, having a meet and greet, a virtual meet and greet, saying, hi, we're real people, two eyes, one head, etc. This is what we're looking for. And lo and behold, wouldn't you know it, we were contacted out of the blue by an agent last night with an off-market offer on a place, but unfortunately that was not quite what we're after. So logistics, shipping of goods. I think we've finally nixed this. Liza's been through all the Facebook groups, got all the referrals, made a ton of inquiries, and we've scoured, partly in the interest of presenting this information to you, and it serves me professionally when I'm speaking with clients dealing with these same sort of issues. We scoped out just moving everything. If we're gonna have to buy a bed there and a mattress there, then let's just move it. We went all the way from moving everything to moving select items to now where we're at, which is looking like moving nothing at all. What really stumped me, and I imagine there's only a few people here on tonight's presentation that would be interested in this, but what stumped me was electric bikes. I'm a cyclist, lifelong cyclist, and I wanted to ship over a couple electric bikes. Turns out that's extremely difficult to do, given differences in laws as to how they're regulated. Lithium batteries, they require special attention. So it's going to be thousands of dollars just to ship the bikes. And so that changed the economics of the whole situation. But I think for the larger end of moving everything, the quotes were coming in at around $10,000 to $12,000, and that's for a 4-bedroom house, you know, with a bed, you know, the kids' bunk beds and dresses and mattresses and the whole 9 yards. And then it was down to about 3 with the bikes, with the e-bikes, and even that, I never really got a firm quote on that, given the cost of the lithium batteries. But that was coming in around 3 with 5 boxes of kitchenware. We were thinking it would be nice to relocate pots, pans, crockery, cutlery, that sort of thing there, have it available to spruce up your future visits. But be careful when shopping around for that, because we found port fees and fumigation fees, and then the quoted time to delivery was shocking. We were given anywhere from 90 to 120 days. So that's really blown out because of COVID. Excuse me. Health insurance, what's news there? Thankfully, through my professional contacts, I know a guy, a global, what is it? Insured Nomad is the name of the firm. He was a former global health benefits consultant for Blue Cross Blue Shield. He put me in touch with a guy in Australia and gave me some recommendations. So for me and the girls who are dual, or in my case, tri-citizens, it's pretty straightforward going on to Medicare and looking at any private insurance that we're looking for over and above that. But for Liza, given that she's not a citizen yet, she's actually just there on a tourist visa by virtue of being a family member, an immediate family member to an Australian citizens. She goes on to a special kind of health insurance, and there's a particular term of art for it, and there's a small market for non-immigrant or what's called a non-immigrant type of temporary resident, and so she's going on to that. Buying things before departure, this is another one that we considered. So put together a huge shopping list. What are those things that you really just can't buy easily in Australia? And so we took an inventory of all of our computer plugs, earplugs, coincidentally, and various other items that we've just come to like. And so we've stocked up on them to make sure we've got enough for 19 months. So let's get into this. So financial challenges. First of all, how did we go about even considering if this was possible at all? Well, it began, as you would imagine, anyone that knows me or has worked with me would know that I'm a big fan of budgeting. Budget cash flow, boring as it may be to some people, is where it's at, because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Stands to reason, right? So I did an initial budget, and the conclusion that I came to was that we could afford to do this trip, but we must rent our house to do it. You know, maybe someday things will be, income will be a bit stronger, but as it is, we'd be looking at foregoing about $3,000 a month to rent our house, and that just would be too much of a financial burden to bear otherwise. So that was the conclusion that I came to. And that in itself was a big nail biter, because we didn't really want to rent our house. And it turns out that renting a furnished house, no one wants to do that in COVID. So we're looking at having to move everything out into storage or sell. So we're doing a major downsizing, moving, of course, all that stuff I mentioned before, moving a bunch of stuff to Australia, and selling a bunch of stuff, and then moving what remains into storage. Okay. So first, actually, I think I'll come back to that in just a minute. So I wanted to show you how I went about doing this. I put together a template, a budget template. Let me just get on the right page here for you to show you. And I did 3 copies of my typical budget. So here we've got the cost of maintaining a home in Minneapolis while in Australia. So this is, if we're not in the US, what ongoing expenses will we have? You can see over here on the left-hand menu, we've got a bunch of property-related expenses, certain kinds of insurance remain. Actually, it turns out that won't remain. Maybe it will. Spotify, disability life, dog boarding, magazine subscriptions, and some certain bank fees. So add it all up, and we're looking at about $3,320 when we annualize that number. Next, so this is what it's going to cost if we're not here. Next, what if we move to Brisbane and we forget about everything we have in the US? What's the base costs of just living life there? And this is what we come up with. So there's the household, there's food, there's rent, of course, electricity, books, going to movies, public transportation, haircuts and hygiene, family gym, health insurance, sports gear, going and entering into bike races. Oh, good question, Belinda. I'll come back to that in just a second. Karina and babysitting. Well, we don't have Karina, but we will have babysitting expenses, doctor copays, bit of travel. And that's what we come up with is in Australian dollars, please note, in Australian dollars, $10,800 to make the clocks turn, to make the trains run on time. Choose your metaphor, your analogy, but that's what it's going to cost. So what have we got? We've got 10,800 Australian dollars, and we've got 3,320 US dollars. Belinda, to answer your question, what are we doing with the dog? Whole nother thing. So I wanted to bring him along. I love him. He's this beautiful golden beagle called Julius. Turns out that's a nightmare. I had an intuition. I've got clients that love pets and they've gone through it and I already knew it was a nightmare. So what we did is we put a notice up on the community, the local community, email bulletin board, and it turned out he was a celebrity. So we were inundated with folks that said, we would love, and I was clear, this is not an adoption model. We're not giving our dog away. This is foster care. So you're going to look after him we thank you for looking after him for this 19-month period, and we'll pay for his food, his vet expenses, his this, his that. And we drew up a contract, and we found some lovely people who have experience with beagles, and we've met them a number of times. He's spent the night there a bunch of times, and so that's what he's doing. We'll stay in touch, and that's the plan. So we can pick up with him when we get back to the US. Thank you for the question. Okay, then we're going to go to, so we've seen cost of living in the US without us here, life in Brisbane in Australian dollars, and then bringing it all together. So this is everything currency converted. So there's a whole bunch of formulas in here, but this is Australia and the US. And so what we come to at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, we've got that 12,517. However, we're subtracting the rent amount. So that's what brings the total monthly in US dollars to 9,858. That's the number that we're shooting for to make this happen. And that's how I came to that conclusion initially. So just going through that again, first US dollars, what's it going to cost for life to continue on here without us? Life in Brisbane, never mind the US stuff, and then bring it all together minus the income from the rent. And then even then there were some adjustments done to that to make it a bit more conservative, given the costs of property management. So I took that into consideration. Okay, so that deals with those three items I've got there. And I wanted to go back to show you an exchange rate sensitivity that I did. So given that we're going to need the cost of what we need in Australia is $10,800 a month, what does that actually look like? What do we need to provide in US dollars to make that happen? The exchange rate has been moving against us lately. I don't expect that to continue, by the way. That's another topic for another time, but right around now it's at 75.5. So that's what it's costing us. And so I'm doing a sensitivity analysis to see how much could this change. And it looks like it's really only about $500. $500 a month. I mean, I sure hope it doesn't go against me, but there are other people on the other side of that equation that are hoping for the opposite. So that's just how the cookie crumbles. Let's look at some one-off expenses as I went in preparing this budget. There's, of course, the airline tickets. That's crazy. Go see our first episode on this series to see how we did that. that ended up being, it's like 8,000 or just shy of $8,000 for one-way tickets, given the craziness going on here. Quarantine hotel fees, so that's $4,800 for a family of 4. Immigration fees, we engaged a lawyer for Eliza's and the girls' citizenship apps and passports. Shipping, we canned, as you heard me say. Rent deposit, we'll need car, furniture, luggage. Luggage, why do I mention that? Because as it happens, this is maybe another little hack with Delta, with a certain status. I'm granted 3 bags, and so is everyone in my party. And that's, maybe I should have mentioned that earlier to do with the decision not to ship stuff, is we're able to bring a total of 12 checked bags. So we investigated the so-called linear dimensions, the maximum linear dimensions allowed with Delta, and are planning to pack that to the brim. And then US purchases, I mentioned that earlier, to do with certain things, you know, like earplugs and power outlets and things like that. So those are all the one-off expenses that we tallied up. Okay, so let's switch gears now. That's what we had there on the financial side. And let's talk about tax planning. I want to be very clear, the philosophy that I have and for my firm and my clients, and that is, we want to be compliant and we want to pay only what tax we're legally required to pay to both countries, but no more. There's no need to leave a tip for the IRS or the ATO. Ideally, if the situation would allow, I would prefer not to get into superannuation, because it's inflexible. It can hurt you on the US side. Australia doesn't recognize superannuation as being a qualified foreign retirement program. And another goal is maxing out my US retirement funding with a 401k and possibly a defined benefit plan. So these are the goals. Now let's see how this has come together. First of all, we need to determine when and where I am a tax resident, or where you are a tax resident. So in this case, for me, it's pretty straightforward. It's when I resume residency in Australia. And that's because as a dual citizen, I'm returning home, and Australia has this concept of a resides test. And you can see that the relevant text taken right here. So I am certainly intending to be present in Australia. My family is coming with me. The family of birth also lives in Brisbane. Maintenance and location, individuals' assets, that's not going to change. I'm still very much keeping a US location for all my financial arrangements. But social and living, there's basically no argument to be made that I am not an Australian resident. I wanted to inquire into that also, just for the interest of clients. So they have this resides test. If you reside in Australia, you are considered an Australian resident. Well, not a whole lot of arguing with that one. Some of the factors that can be used: well, I'm going to be present. I'm intending to be present. My family's there. Business is technically not there. That's another, we'll talk about that in a moment. And then they have these other 3 tests, which may be relevant to you and your circumstance. Again, I would encourage you to go and seek professional tax and immigration advice on these matters. Okay, tax residency. Was it possible? Is this somehow I could say, I'm not a tax resident? No way, not a chance. Maybe for a short period of time, but not for 19 months. No way. Remember, you can only be a tax resident of one country at one time. Now that's said with a little asterisk above that. I said tax resident. Primary tax resident is the term of art you have to use if you are also a US citizen. Why? Because the US is one of the only developed countries in the world that practices citizenship-based taxation. So what does that mean? Even though I am a tax resident in Australia, Uncle Sam has his hand out and says, we want to assess you for any tax due and owing to us, even while you're in Australia. Thank you very much. Okay. However, one of the countries is going to get first bite of the cherry, and that is going to be determined by really 2 things, and that is, where am I the primary tax resident of, and what is the source of the income that I'm generating. So tax residency and source. So we've also already been over this. I'm going to be a tax resident of Australia, and that's going to happen really as soon as I get there because of the intent and the facts and circumstances. Arriving with my family, one-way ticket. There's nothing to hide. I'm very, very open about the intentions here. So the tiebreaker provisions mean that this is how they would determine where you're a tax resident of. But in my circumstance, I'm going to be a tax resident of Australia as soon as I get there. Why am I belaboring this point? Why am I belaboring this point? Because there is a planning opportunity inherent here. What is that planning opportunity? We have a disparate tax year. The US follows the calendar year, as we know, and Australia is staggered for July 1st to June 30th. So what does that mean? That means I'm going to be leaving the US 13 days into the 2021 tax year, and I'm going to be arriving in Australia in the last 5.5 months of the 2020-2021 tax year. Interesting. Okay. So what does that suggest with regards to the timing of income and expenses between the different tax years? Is there a possibility of accelerating income into the first 2 weeks of the year while I'm still a US tax resident, and deferring some expenses to be recognized when I'm an Australian tax resident, given the differences in the federal income tax rates? Well, yes, there is. So that generally, as you heard me just say a moment ago, the strategy would be to accelerate income in the US and defer expenses to the Australian tax year. That's also, it introduces some fascinating strategies with what you might do with your retirement plan or any other business expense for that matter. And that would be, given the US tax years following the calendar year, you might, for instance, decide to put to split up your contribution half between the first half of the year and the second half of the year. Or another strategy, would be to max out, let's say, a 401k plan. Business owners can get as much as $57,000 into a plan like that, and a defined benefit plan. This is another strategy available to business owners, where it depends on your age and a whole bunch of other things to do with your company demographics and stuff. But there is a possibility where I might be able to time retirement contributions into the first part of the year for one plan to recognize expenses on the US side, thus decreasing taxable income in Australia, and then do a separate plan with however cash flow allows and affords in the second half of the year, which would affect me in the next Australian tax year. So there we go. Fund the DB plan first, and then make elective 401k contributions. DB plans are very inflexible. You must fund them at a given level. 401ks are pretty much totally elective. Okay, so who has first taxing rights, the US or Australia, and how will I be taxed while I'm in Australia? So despite being an Australian tax resident, I'm definitely an Australian tax resident, the source of income, owning two US LLCs taxed as S Corp, is in fact the US. So the US gets the first bite of the cherry. And essentially this is interesting because it enables one to engage in all the ordinary business accounting and retirement contributions that they would ordinarily do if they were present in the US, leaving only the W-2 and K-1 distributions taxable as ordinary income in Australia. There isn't the possibility of divvying up and changing how you're paying yourself, either by W-2 or K-1 as a dividend distribution. Australia looks through all of that and just says, we don't care, it's all ordinary income to us. But nevertheless, there's still a lot of flexibility allowed on the US side. Now, keep in mind, as I've said at every chance and at every opportunity this is relevant, this is super dependent on your situation. So if you were not a dual citizen, say as I am, and you were to try this, if you're on an E3, for instance, well, you can't be an S Corp owner. You can't take that form of taxation as a non-resident. So wouldn't work. So quite specific. Again, seek your tax and legal advice specific to you. Will I pay US state taxes? Fine question, because remember, the tax treaties are not between the states, they're between the federal government. So I live here in Minnesota, and congratulations, I get to pay about 7.3% to the state government here. Well, thank goodness I do not need to engage in a strategy that had been mentioned to me by a tax professional, and that was the notion of redomesticating my businesses out of Minnesota and into states like South Dakota or Nevada, somewhere like that, where there is no state tax. That would be one strategy. And that could be something that would make a lot of sense if you were in a state that didn't have the residency rules that Minnesota does. And essentially Minnesota says, well, if you're not here, we're not going to tax you because you're not resident. And that's not the case everywhere, specifically California. What about Social Security taxes? I often thought when I first moved to the US, I thought these Americans are misspeaking when they talk about taxes, but they're not. There's all these different kinds of taxes. For someone that lived in Manhattan, you've got federal, you've got state, you've got city, and you've got self-employment or otherwise known as Social Security taxes. So what about Social Security taxes? Well, if I didn't file as an S Corp, as I do, if I was a single member LLC and paid self-employment taxes, then I would be covered by Australia, and therefore I would be forced to contribute to SEPA. But I don't pay taxes that way. I've been structured as an S Corp since incorporation, and thus, according to the totalization agreement, this handy-dandy document right here, you can see, let's go up to the top, the agreement between the United States and Australia. Well, lo and behold, thank goodness, you were sent to work. Now, I'm sending myself to work in Australia for less than 5 years. I'm only subject to the laws of, you guessed it, the US. So I'm not worried about being roped into superannuation as a result of that. But it could happen depending on how you choose your taxation as a business owner. And that's really a wrap. That's what I had for you tonight. I did want to mention there's a couple white papers you might be interested in if these topics are something that you're interested in exploring further. My firm has we've commissioned a couple white papers here, including passive foreign investment corporations and how they affect your investment strategy abroad. And that's actually quite complicated. It's boring, yes, but super important. Essentially, if you're a US citizen or US green card holder abroad, don't be owning any foreign domiciled mutual funds or ETFs. Bad news, or REITs for that matter, bad news. And then the pros and cons of managed fund investing in Australia. So this is where they are on our website. What do we have next? If you were interested, if you felt there was something I said where you felt we might be able to provide advice, then I invite you to come to our webpage and schedule a fit meeting. Do note, we work with a pretty small group of clients. Minimum investable assets is $750,000, and we put our clients first. Every part of this trip has been done with thinking about how I'd be able to maintain consistent service to my clients. Okay, so the questions are rolling in. Hey, Niccolo, how you doing? Good to virtually meet you here. What's the best business structure for non-resident Australians who have a US business? By gosh, it's a little bit like how long is a piece of string? That being said, I would say that this LLC, taxes and S Corp, seems to be working for my goals. But remember, my goals are mine, and your goals are yours. I am just trying to find where I spelt them out here. That's not it. Creating a new budget template. Where did I specify my goals? Tax residency goals. Here we are. Okay, so that's it. If those happen by chance to also be your goals, then that would be a good fit. But that might not be the case. Any other questions, concerns, or doubtful points? Now is the time to get them in. Laurie, all right, pretty sure the Australian is heading towards 80 cents in the short term, long-term uptrend in the coming years. What is your hedging strategy? Well, that would be quite a significant move if it did get up to 80 cents, and it might happen. You know, anything's possible. No one has a crystal ball. What's the hedging strategy? There's a couple ways. You might be interested in going back to YouTube video I did on this a while ago now. I feel like it was about 18 months ago, talking about foreign exchange and hedging strategies. So first of all, my clients enjoy institutional exchange rates, by far the best out there. We get 10 basis points. If you're with OFX, TransferWise, you're getting 60. That's what's costing you. So the foreign exchange rate we get is 1/6 of that. We can use limit orders to essentially trade is placed whenever it breaches through a particular limit that we've set. And another strategy, more advanced strategy, would be what's called a costless collar. And that's really getting quite esoteric. That's where we look at options to try and mitigate that exchange rate volatility. But I hope that answers your question, Laurie. Matt writes, am dealing with complicated issues of returning to Australia and understanding capital cost base of my Aussie assets when I return. Very challenging. Primary residence suggests, yes, I know your pain, Matt. I know exactly what you're talking about there. Especially to do with your primary residence, because your tax will change, especially if you move back into that primary residence, which of course you probably would, given that word primary. You're going to resume your unlimited capital gains exemption once you resume that primary residency, and be taxed on the difference when you're a non-resident. So I can understand that would be difficult. And then as for your other assets, I wonder what the challenges are there exactly. Probably pertain to your immigration status. I'm guessing you're not a US dual citizen. But we'll give a moment for other questions to roll in. Q&A. Oh, Matt wrote over here. Oh, actually, it's the same question. I didn't have my Q&A panel open. Any more questions or heads spinning? Is this just been so riveting? People they've just lost all their words. This is so, they're mesmerized, they're fascinated. This is your chance to ask some questions. I'm going to give it another couple seconds here. And to Belinda, yes, Julius is incredibly sweet. I love him very much and look forward to getting back. And I missed him dearly, even on these weekends that he's been away. Matt, very appreciated. In hotel quarantine right now, having been doing the same planning for 4 months. Wow. Well, I feel you. My goodness, if anyone does, yeah, I know exactly. I know I can picture it at least. I hope your quarantine experience is okay, and that they haven't turned the electricity off to your cooking appliances, as I've heard that they are doing in Victoria for reasons that I can't quite fathom. Hobie, hi Hobie. You mentioned bringing a dog over to Australia is a nightmare. Is it not even worth considering? Well, you know, that's a thing. Hobie, I don't know, you know, your financial situation, but it was looking at being about $8,000, as I recall, given all of the things involved. So the keeping the dog in special cargo, then they have to go to quarantine, a bunch of tests. It was just a nightmare. And I love him. I wish he could come. I wish it wasn't so difficult, but it is. So he's staying here. Nancy, hey Nancy, you mentioned you are not licensed in Australia. Will you be? No. How will this affect your business there? I want to recommend a client to you. Well, that's very kind of you, but I work with Americans in Australia with their American assets, not their Australian assets, and Australians in America. I will retain. I am in the process of becoming an SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission registered advisor, which would allow me to work with my clients from overseas, but I have no interest in getting registered in Australia for various reasons. But that's very kind of you, and thank you for the thought. Belinda, hi Belinda. Thank you for your time. Very interesting. We are moving in 2022, so we look forward to watching the next 2 webinars and seeing your journey. Well, thank you. All right. I look forward to keeping you in the loop. Anonymous. All right. I'm a green card holder married to a U.S. citizen. Okay. I'm considering applying for U.S. citizenship, but I have superannuation. I own a house in Australia. Long term, we're retired to Australia, but for the next 20 years, it's the U.S. Would you apply for U.S. citizenship? I love how that's been framed. It's what would I do in that case? The unknown, I think, where I would fall on that one would be, what's your income and net worth trajectory? So we've certainly experienced in the last 4 years a lot of uncertainty on the immigration front. I've had a number of clients, visa holders in particular, that have had all sorts of difficulties getting those renewed. And so those that did transition to a green card for that particular reason, we're happy that they did. But remember, when you get the green card, two things happen. One, you become a worldwide tax resident of the US, so long as you have your green card and you have not surrendered it and submitted Form I-407, which is your termination of US tax residency. Even if your green card expires and you have not submitted 407, you're still a US tax resident. And there's cases that I can point to on that. The second thing that happens when you convert from a visa to, and I should say the visa is slightly different, because while you're in the US, you're taxable on your worldwide income. But when you're not in the US, let's say you're on an E3, return to Australia, depending on the facts and circumstances, but in most instances, you would be then counted as an Australian resident, not having to worry about to report on US. So you would not be considered a US tax resident. You'd only be considered an Australian tax resident. But that's not your situation. So back to having a green card, the clock starts on the HART Act. It's an act from 2008. The Heroes Earnings and Repatriation Tax is what HART stands for. And that essentially applies 3 tests to determine whether you're deemed a covered expatriate and would have to pay an exit tax at the time of departure. Most people sail through the first 2 of those. The one that gets most folks, however, is the third one. Do you have a global net worth of more than $2 million? And that's not inflation indexed, that number. If you own a house, if you've got company stock options, if you've got a decent retirement nest egg, this is a global net worth. If it's worth more than $2 million, you will be deemed a covered expatriate, and you may be assessed an exit tax. The way that exit tax is calculated is very complicated. They do give you a big capital gains exemption, but there's a lot of planning that goes into that. And so when you become a green card and you stay beyond 7 years, you've now become eligible for that test, for those 3 tests to be applied against you to see if an exit tax would be applicable. Brett, howdy, Brett. Thanks for some of you. Is there any advantage of being a dual citizen, tax-wise or financially even? No. I can say that really, really quickly, because that's been my life. Tri-citizen from birth, nothing I could really do about it. It is what it is. Anything to take advantage of? Not really. How about this? I'll give you a smart aleck answer. You get to take advantage of the local residence line when you're coming through immigration, going in either direction. How about that? But in terms financially, not really. This is where this kind of cross-border planning that my firm specializes in comes into it. I mean, this is how I came to do what I do, is because I was so perplexed by it. I'm kind of into finances anyway, but I was so perplexed by it, I just got into it and kept peeling away, each additional layer of the onion. Okay. Any other questions? If not, there are. I just need to keep scrolling down. Thanks, thanks, Brett. Andrew, hi, Andrew. Will a trust count towards your exit tax of $2 million? If it is an irrevocable trust, no, because it's not technically your property. But if it's a revocable living trust, i.e. you still have complete discretion over distribution and ownership of that property, then yes, it absolutely would. Brett, okay, I'll be in touch. Thanks again. Fantastic. I'm not seeing any more questions here. We're going to give it to the count of 3, 2, 3, and bid you adieu and au revoir. And I'll look forward to seeing you all next month from quarantine. And Eliza will be on next month's webinar as well. All right. Thank you, everyone. Be well, and look forward to next month. All the best. Bye-bye.